The winter of 1944 descended on the forests of eastern Germany with the kind of brutal cold that made survival more difficult than combat. Temperatures dropping below zero, snow accumulating in drifts that swallowed vehicles, terrain that turned supply lines into death marches. The war was ending. Everyone knew it. But German forces weren't surrendering. They were improvising. And in one particularly desperate Luftwaffe maintenance depot near Dresden, a 19-year-old aircraft mechanic named Klaus Weber was about to create something that would haunt Canadian infantry for the final months of the war. Something that shouldn't have worked. Something that violated every principle of weapons design. A machine gun built entirely from scrapped aircraft parts that would kill 10 Canadian soldiers before anyone figured out what they were facing. And the Canadian platoon that first encountered it reported, "Enemy machine gun position, heavy sustained fire, unknown weapon type, not MG-42, not MG-34, something else, request identification." By the time headquarters responded, the gun had already killed 8 men and wounded 12 more. And when Canadian forces finally overran the position, what they found made absolutely no sense. A weapon cobbled together from airplane hydraulics, wing struts, and engine components that had no business functioning as infantry armament, but somehow delivered accurate, devastating fire. If you want to understand how German desperation and mechanical genius combined to create improvised weapons that terrified Allied forces, even as the Reich collapsed, make sure you subscribe. Because this story about Klaus Weber's aircraft parts machine gun reveals how ingenuity born from collapse can be more dangerous than factory-designed weapons, and why some of history's deadliest innovations come from people who have nothing left to lose. Let me take you back to late 1944. The Luftwaffe is destroyed. Allied bombing has devastated German aircraft production. The few planes Germany still has are grounded by fuel shortages, by lack of spare parts, by the simple reality that trained pilots are dead and replacements aren't being produced fast enough. Luftwaffe bases across Germany have become graveyards, runways littered with wrecked aircraft, hangars full of planes that will never fly again, workshops packed with parts that have no purpose because the machines they were designed for no longer exist. So Klaus Weber works at one of these dying bases, a maintenance depot near Dresden that had once serviced fighter squadrons, but by late 1944 has become a salvage operation. The work is soul-crushing, stripping valuable metals from wrecked aircraft, cataloguing parts that might be useful somewhere, burning what's left. Weber is technically a Luftwaffe mechanic, but there are no aircraft to maintain. He's 19 years old, trained for a job that no longer exists, watching the war collapse around him while performing meaningless labor with parts from machines that will never fly again. But Weber is mechanically gifted, the kind of person who understands how things work not from manuals, but from touching them, from taking them apart and putting them back together, from seeing patterns that others miss. And as he's stripping parts from destroyed aircraft, he starts noticing something. Aircraft weapon systems, the machine guns mounted in wings and fuselages, share fundamental mechanical principles with infantry weapons. They both fire bullets. They both use recoil or gas operation to cycle rounds. They both need feeding mechanisms and trigger systems. The difference is scale and mounting, not core function. Aircraft machine guns like the MG-151/20 or the MG-131 were designed for aerial combat. High rate of fire, reliable operation at altitude, ability to function in extreme conditions. They're sophisticated, precisely manufactured weapons, but they're useless without aircraft to mount them on. And the depot where Weber works has dozens of them, stripped from wrecked planes, are catalogued and stored because someone in the logistics chain thinks they might be valuable someday. Weber looks at these weapons and thinks, what if you could adapt them for ground use? What if you could take an aircraft machine gun and turn it into an infantry weapon? The idea is absurd on multiple levels. Aircraft guns are too heavy for infantry use. They require power systems that soldiers can't carry. They're designed for fixed mounts, not mobile operations. They use ammunition feed systems incompatible with ground combat. Every technical consideration says this won't work. But Weber is 19, has nothing but time and access to unlimited aircraft parts, and is living through the collapse of a regime that no longer cares about proper procedures. So he starts experimenting. He takes an MG-131 13mm aircraft machine gun, a weapon designed to be mounted in bomber defensive positions. It's too heavy to be carried by one person. It requires hydraulic systems for aiming. It feeds from ammunition boxes designed for aircraft installation. Weber strips it down to core components. He removes the aircraft mounting brackets. He fabricates a ground mount using wing struts welded together, creating a bipod that's crude but functional. He adapts the trigger mechanism by connecting it to hydraulic lines salvaged from aircraft landing gear. The hydraulic pressure provides the force needed to operate the firing mechanism without requiring electrical power. The ammunition feed system is the hardest problem. The MG-131 uses a dual feed system designed for aircraft belt boxes. Weber can't carry those in ground combat, so he modifies the feed mechanism using parts from multiple aircraft, creating a hybrid system that accepts standard infantry ammunition belts but uses aircraft feeding mechanisms to handle the heavy 13mm rounds. The result is mechanically insane. It's 3 different weapon systems combined into something that violates every principle of weapons design. But when Weber tests it in the woods outside the depot, it works. It fires. It cycles reliably. It delivers accurate fire at ranges exceeding standard infantry machine guns. Word spreads through the depot. Other mechanics see what Weber's built. They start helping. Within weeks, Weber and a small team have created a half-dozen of these hybrid weapons, each one slightly different because they're built from whatever parts are available, each one improvised and unique, but all functional. And by December 1944, as Soviet forces approach from the East and Western Allies push from the West, the Luftwaffe depot is officially disbanded. The personnel are reassigned to infantry units desperately short of weapons and ammunition. Weber and his hybrid guns are sent to reinforce defensive positions in the forests of Saxony, where Canadian forces are advancing as part of the final Allied push into Germany. January 1945. Canadian infantry advancing through dense forest near the Elbe River. Standard tactics: probe forward, identify resistance, call in artillery or air support, advance once positions are suppressed. The terrain is brutal. Snow, cold, limited visibility. German resistance has been sporadic. Some positions fight hard, others surrender immediately, predicting which is impossible. The Canadians have learned to be cautious, to expect anything. A Canadian platoon, about 40 men, is moving through a wooded area when they start taking fire. The sound is wrong. Not the distinctive rip of an MG-42 that every Allied soldier has learned to fear. Not the slower rate of an MG-34. Something else. Heavier. Slower cyclic rate, but individual shots that hit with tremendous force. The Canadians take cover, call for fire support, prepare for standard suppression tactics. But the gun keeps firing, and the rounds are punching through cover that normally protects against machine gun fire. Going through tree trunks, through the snowbanks, soldiers are hiding behind, hitting with energy that suggests something much larger than standard infantry weapons. The platoon sergeant radios back, taking heavy fire from unknown weapon type, not standard MG, rounds penetrating cover. Request identification and fire support. Artillery is called in, but the gun position is too close to Canadian lines for safe fire. Air support is unavailable due to weather. The Canadians try to flank the position, but the gun's field of fire covers all approaches. Every time soldiers attempt to advance, the weapon opens up. Not continuous fire like an MG-42, but carefully aimed bursts that suggest the gunner knows exactly what he's doing. Over the next 2 hours, the improvised gun kills 10 Canadian soldiers and wounds 15 more. The casualties aren't from spray and pray suppression. They're from precise, devastating fire that penetrates cover and hits targets at ranges where the Canadians' return fire is ineffective. Finally, Canadian forces bring up a tank, a Sherman that can provide direct fire support, as the tank's 75mm gun destroys the German position with high explosive rounds. When Canadian infantry advance to secure the area, they find Klaus Weber and 2 other German soldiers dead, and next to them, a weapon that makes no sense. It's clearly a machine gun, but it's built from aircraft parts. The barrel is from an MG-131. The mount is welded aircraft struts. The trigger mechanism uses hydraulic lines. The ammunition feed is a hybrid of 3 different systems. It looks like it was assembled in a scrapyard by someone who'd never seen a real weapon. And yet the evidence around the position, empty casings, impact marks on trees where rounds had penetrated cover, proves it worked. It worked well enough to kill 10 men and hold off an entire platoon for 2 hours. The Canadians document the weapon, photographs, technical analysis. You'd reports sent up the chain describing this improvised gun and asking if other units have encountered similar weapons. And the answer comes back, yes. Multiple Canadian and British units have reported encounters with unknown heavy machine guns that don't match any recognized German weapon. Some descriptions match Weber's design. Others describe different configurations, but all improvised from aircraft parts, all created by desperate Luftwaffe mechanics using salvaged components to build weapons that shouldn't exist. Allied intelligence tries to figure out if this is organized German program or individual improvisation. The analysis concludes it's the latter. There's no standardization, no official designation, no evidence of central coordination. These are weapons built by mechanics who had access to aircraft parts and the skills to repurpose them, who created solutions to the German weapons shortage using whatever materials were available. The weapons are effective not because they're well designed, but because they use components that were designed for aircraft, high-quality manufacturing, robust materials, reliable mechanisms. When adapted for ground use by someone who knows what they're doing, these parts create weapons that are crude but deadly. The deeper significance of Weber's gun isn't its tactical effectiveness, though it killed 10 Canadian soldiers, and that's significant. It's what it reveals about late-war German desperation and improvisation. By early 1945, Germany's industrial capacity is destroyed. Factories are bombed. Supply chains are broken. The trained workers are dead or conscripted. The weapons production system that had equipped millions of soldiers has collapsed. Standard weapons like the MG-42 or Kar-98K are increasingly scarce. Ammunition is rationed. Units are being sent to the front with whatever equipment can be scrounged. In this environment, people like Weber, mechanics with skills and access to materials, become critical. They're not following official designs or government contracts. They're solving immediate problems using whatever resources exist. Need a machine gun? Build one from aircraft parts? Need ammunition? Salvage it from wrecked vehicles? Need mounts and tripods? Weld together scrap metal. The results are ugly, unstandardized, impossible to maintain through normal military logistics. But they function. And in the final months of the war, a function is all that matters. The Canadian forces who encountered these improvised weapons developed a wary respect for German mechanical ingenuity, even as they fought to destroy the regime that had created the conditions requiring such improvisation. After Weber's position was overrun, the improvised gun was sent to Allied technical intelligence for analysis. Engineers examined it, tested it, tried to understand how someone had created a functional machine gun from parts that were never designed to work together. The conclusion was that it required both mechanical skill and desperate creativity. The kind of innovation that only happens when conventional solutions aren't available and failure means death. Weber himself didn't survive to see the war's end. He died defending his improvised gun position in January 1945, along with the 2 other Luftwaffe mechanics who'd helped him build it. His name appears in German casualty records, but not in weapons development histories. The gun he built doesn't have an official designation. It exists in Allied intelligence files as improvised heavy machine gun, aircraft parts, and in Canadian casualty reports as the weapon that killed 10 soldiers in a forest near the Elbe. After the war, several of these improvised aircraft parts guns were recovered from German positions and sent to museums or technical archives. They're displayed as examples of late-war German desperation and improvisation. Military analysts study them as case studies in how industrial collapse forces tactical adaptation, how skilled workers can create effective weapons from unlikely materials. So how desperation drives innovation in directions that peacetime planning never anticipates. The Canadian soldiers who survived the encounter with Weber's gun would occasionally discuss it in post-war veteran gatherings. The weapon became part of the oral history of units that fought in Eastern Germany in early 1945, the aircraft gun that killed men from positions that should have been suppressible with standard tactics, that represented the unpredictable danger of fighting an enemy that was improvising survival with whatever materials remained. Veterans would describe the distinctive sound, not like any standard German weapon, and the way rounds penetrated cover that normally provided safety. And the realization when they finally overran the position that they'd been facing something built in a workshop by mechanics who'd turned airplane parts into infantry weapons. The story of Klaus Weber and his improvised gun is one of those historical footnotes that reveals more than major battles about what war actually demands from people. Weber wasn't a weapons designer or a combat veteran. He was a teenage mechanic who found himself in a collapsing regime with access to aircraft parts and the skills to repurpose them. He created a weapon that killed Allied soldiers not through superior design, but through desperate ingenuity and the high-quality components he salvaged from wrecked aircraft. And he died defending a position with a gun he'd built himself, fighting for a cause that was already lost, demonstrating that even in collapse, the humans find ways to continue fighting if they believe they have no other choice. The Canadians couldn't believe he'd built a gun from aircraft parts. Not at first. Not until they saw the wreckage of the position and the improvised weapon that had killed 10 of their comrades. And then they understood, not just that it was possible, but that desperation and skill can create threats that training and intelligence never prepared them for. The ghost gun built from airplane parts became one more reminder that war's final stages are often the most dangerous, not because of organized resistance, but because of individuals who improvise lethality from whatever materials remain when everything else has been destroyed.